10, 9, 8. Ignition sequence has started. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
You have entered Untold Radio AM. And now broadcasting from a secret location, your hosts, Joel Sturgis and Doug Hijack.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going. Welcome to Untold Radio. So, how is the weather in your neck of the woods? It's like 70-mile-an-hour winds here. It's just nuts.
Yeah, it's still pretty terrible.
Yeah.
Still cold.
And last night we had this crazy storm. It was so crazy, Alex. I took a photo of the radar map because it was this line of storms that just went all the way from Oklahoma all the way to Minnesota in this perfectly straight line. It was just bizarre, super bizarre. So anyhow, and we had 5 inches of rain last night.
Yeah, it was pretty bad thunder.
Anyhow, so Joel is sick today. He called in sick. He's got the flu. So hopefully he gets well quick. Hopefully it isn't COVID again. But anyhow, so let's do a little bit of housekeeping. One, we're going to have Dr. Russ Jones on in maybe 10 minutes or so. And he's going to tell us a really cool story of basically about the Bigfoot food chain, something he's witnessed. Because we were talking about that with Dan Nadrello. Remember we were talking about salamanders, maybe being a food source. And anyhow, Russ heard this on the radio, and he's got an incredible story. And I was just, basically, spewing out ideas on things they may eat, food sources. But anyhow, Russ will be joining us. And then I definitely want to tell people to definitely not only participate in the chat room, we love that, but leave comments. And Alex, you explained to me why people need to leave comments.
It's all about engagement. The more comments you leave, it gives us something to talk about. If you have a question for our guest, now is the time to do it. It's live. It gives you a chance.
No. I'm talking about the comments in the comments section, not the chat room.
Oh, in the actual comments, like on YouTube.
Yeah, that's why it's so important.
So basically, if you interact with the video, you're telling YouTube, hey, I care about this enough to leave a comment, to voice my opinion.
Right.
And they're more likely to promote it to more people. So it'll help get the word out for us. So, even as much as like a thank you for having the show on, we'd really appreciate it.
Yep. Anyhow, and also when we hit 1,000 subscribers, you're going to need to leave a comment because we're not going to pick somebody that didn't leave a comment. So you have to leave a comment in, not in the chat room, but in the actual show, in one of the shows. So leave a glowing comment. We might be judging, right? Maybe.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyhow. So I had something really weird happen to me the other day, and I haven't told anybody about it. It happened in the garage. I don't know if I've ever told you stories that the house is fine, but my garage is haunted. The actual garage.
It's confined to the garage.
To the garage. Yeah, it's really weird. So we pull in, so me and Blaine pulled in the last time I drove my Jeep, right? Pulled in together, everything's cool, get out of the Jeep, whatever, everything's normal. So we go to leave again, and we hear a crunching sound. And I'm like, well, what's this crunching sound?
Mm-hmm.
It's really weird,
Creepy.
And I stop right away. I only move it like a foot. And I go, no, I better stop and investigate. It's not a good thing when you're backing up and you're hearing a crunching sound. And I look, and there's an electric bike under the Jeep, wedged under it in the middle. Yeah, which would have meant, there's no way I drove over the top of an electric bike. I would have
No.
crunched
Without
it. You
knowing.
heard, yeah, no, didn't happen because I have a clear view when I pull in. But there's this bike wedged under there, and it took me forever to get it out. And we're just thinking the ghost, because we've had all sorts of weird things. We'll have our thermostat turn full blast. We'll have things thrown at us while we're in the garage, literally tossed at us. I mean, I've been smacked in the head before, crunching, banging. We literally had something again last night. It's like super loud noises, and sometimes you find or see the physical object that was moved. It's kind of weird. And actually had to have a pastor come in one time and kind of do a blessing in my garage because it was
Does it
getting out
help
of
or
hand.
make things worse?
No, it helped. Yeah, it went away for a long time actually, but now it's back again.
So you're gonna have them out again, or
I don't know. Yeah, I don't think I have any choice. But you can understand how freaky it was to think something while I'm sleeping put an e-bike under the Jeep.
wedged?
It's
it,
like a
right?
joke. Yeah, it's like a joke or whatever. It's pretty weird. So anyhow,
Do you think it's because of the land the house was built on?
I don't know. No, probably not. It's probably what I do for a living. It's kind of what I'm thinking. I think, there's that old saying, when you go looking for it, it comes looking for you. So
Yeah.
it may prove it. Anyhow, I just wanted to get that out of the way. Oh, the other one that's really creepy that happens quite a bit is bells ringing. So I'll have bells on these bikes, right? Those Tinkerbell things, you got to pull the lever.
Yep. The bells.
Yep. And all of a sudden you'll hear zing, and then another one will go off, and you're like, oh my God, you just get chills. It's not, once again, it's nothing scary, too scary, but it's kind of spine tingling.
Oh, it's scary enough for me.
Yeah.
I wasn't getting any sleep.
You've never experienced any ghost activity, I take it, ever.
No.
Yeah. Well, you're lucky.
I'm like
You're lucky.
antimatter for
But you don't-
paranormal activity.
Yeah, but you don't look for it either. You're not looking for those kinds of deals.
No, like part of me would want to experience it, but then how do you close that door once things start happening?
Yeah, no, that's true. So I just noticed kind of a weird coincidence. I saw a photo. You remember we had Louis Anderson on our show?
Yeah.
Back, I think it was last summer, and Louis passed.
Yeah, I know.
Which is really sad. Anyhow, so I saw this photo online, and it was Bob Saget, who's passed, Louis Anderson, and Gilbert Godfrey, all three comedians, who are all alive and well and smiling in this photo in January of 2021. And now they're all passed. They're all gone. It's just weird to me. You can be here, all three of these people, and they're all in the same photo. So it's kind of weird.
Yeah, they're all very active too.
Yeah, and the Bob Saget thing is still kind of a mystery. I'm not really necessarily buying into the narrative on that one. Not necessarily. It's a little odd how you die with a carpeted hotel room from a head injury. It seems weird to me. I don't know. Whatever. We'll leave that up to the experts. So anyhow, Better Call Saul, new season coming. I'm excited about that. It's one of the few shows I've watched.
Oh, I'm super excited. I'm totally caught up on that.
Oh, you are? Oh, okay. You're all caught up. Yep. And we had one of the actors on, Jesus Payan was on our show, and he was
Bigfoot, right?
Yep. And he's a Bigfoot researcher. So that's kind of cool. It's kind of cool knowing somebody in there. I don't know if he'll be in season 6. I have no idea. So literally 10 minutes before showtime, I got on the phone, answered, actually called Rick Knowles back. And he had a story. He was all excited about saber-toothed tigers, a couple of science things he wanted to drop on me. One, he said they discovered saber-toothed tigers were marsupials, which means they had a pouch.
They had a pouch.
They had a pouch like a kangaroo.
Which they didn't know before.
No, and they really aren't cats. Apparently, they've done some DNA. and they're not cats. More related to bears, saber-toothed tigers.
Interesting.
So I thought, oh, that's interesting. I haven't confirmed any of this myself, but I trust Rick. He's kind of into science.
Absolutely. Just wanted to say, sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
Russ is backstage.
Oh, cool. Great. What time we got? It's already 7:12. God, that's crazy.
I know.
Anyhow, he also mentioned that they've gotten apparently DNA from early hominids, 57,000-year-old DNA on saber-toothed tigers that they had preserved in a cave that they had collected.
Mm.
And apparently they've gotten now early hominid DNA too here. Just was announced.
An early hominid.
Yeah. And my first question to Rick was, have they put it in the gen bank, this info?
Mm-hmm.
So I doubt they have, but so I'm going to be doing some research, and certainly I would encourage everybody to do that. It could really affect Bigfoot research. Super big time. Super big time. Well, let's bring Russ on and have him tell this crazy story before we run out of time. And Russ, Dr. Russ Jones was on our show. I don't remember the exact episode, but he was on a show. He's an amazing person who does, I call it kind of deep woods research. And he's very methodical. And most researchers, Alex will put up 2 camera traps, 1. Russ is the guy that puts up 30 of them.
30.
He's that guy. Yeah. So let's bring Russ on.
All right. Hey, Russ.
Hey, how you guys?
How are you?
I'm good. Waiting for spring.
Yeah, you and everybody.
I know. It's a little pretty bad here.
So tell us this story. Obviously, maybe you can just give everybody a real quick primer on your research and how deep you go into it.
Yeah, so right now I heard Alex say 30. I'm up to 40-something cameras now.
Oh, geez.
And, always trying to come up. Of course, some of the people might be aware. I talk to Doug pretty often or text you. Yep. Doug's pretty inventive and creative, so I'm always trying to come up with some new ways to fool something in the woods. And so I'm enjoying that. I'm spending a lot of time doing that. I probably last weekend looked at around 15,000 pictures. What usually happens is on each camera trap that you set up, there'll be a little leaf or something that gets in the way. And, you're trying to really hedge it in there so nothing can see what your camera. And so by doing that, you always risk something sneaking in there.
Right. People don't realize how much work it is doing the type of research you're doing more on a far more professional level.
Yeah. What I do is, I'm a chiropractor. I've been in practice. This is my 31st year. And so I have a Cabela's card. I run my office through my Cabela's card. And so about every maybe 3 months or so, I can get a new camera. The Reconyx Hyperfire is around $400. And I'm still running those and the Reconyx HC600s, which were around $500.
Gosh.
And so now I have started buying a couple other camera brands and putting them in select places just in case there's something weird about the Reconyx cameras that make it so that I'm not getting, a picture of something.
Right.
And of course, you and I had talked before that I believe that the animals were hearing the cameras are about 30 decibels. The cheaper ones are louder. And so now maybe for several months, I'm strictly trying to be at places where they're loud. Like I may walk down a creek and wherever the creek is loud, I put a camera up, not paying any attention to whether it's in a saddle or a dip or some other place that I think the game may travel, just trying to do different things.
Yep. I think that's important. It's certainly the sound of Bluff Creek aided in Bob and Roger getting that footage. There's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
But what we were talking about earlier is I had heard Dan was on your show, the biologist, and he was talking about reptiles being a food source or whatever, and was thinking that maybe along those lines. And so I had reached out to you to remind you that about probably for me, it was around 15 years ago, I was completing my certified master naturalist certification. And one of the things that we do is visit vernal pools. And so a vernal pool is, we've all seen them, but they're in these lowlands where a creek floods or winter rains, winter snows, it fills these areas that are they're a mini wetland. They don't have an entrance. They don't have an exit. They're an area holding it. Sometimes they're the size of a room, sometimes the size of a small pond.
But they're temporary.
They're temporary. By summer, they're largely gone. And they're common to see them. And so where I concentrate on looking at these, I'm telling you, these are, when you think of smorgasbord for food, the primary thing I think of in nature is beaver dams is a really hot spot for, there's just a lot of food at beaver dams. If you can find a remote when I'm in there looking around or cameras up, that type of thing. But we were doing this as part of the Master Naturalist class because all through Appalachia and much of the country, different types of salamanders. Here we have primarily the spotted salamanders, and they come down off the mountains into these vernal pools. Here, it is usually the first warm rain of April. So, we may be, say, a month or two ahead of you, 4 or 6 years, I'm not sure. So you'd have to learn it out that way to see what it was. But I mean, when they say the hills move, you're talking literally hundreds of thousands, millions of these spotted salamanders coming off the mountainsides into the vernal pools to breed. And you may see a dozen hawks, or not hawks, it's at night. You may see a dozen owls sitting out there. Coyotes are everywhere. These are very docile salamanders that, you just think Snickers bars.
Yeah.
And so a huge food source. And so I just started thinking that, there's a good chance that Bigfoot may visit these. Because if you think, really it's the first thing in the year. I always think of treat foods as my big thing. Whenever I'm going into an area, I'm not looking. I know commonly people say, well, they have to eat deer and they're where deer are. And that's true. But largely in Appalachia, we have deer everywhere. And if you saw a field without deer, you would be surprised.
Right.
So, it's not that helpful, but I look for areas where I call treat food. So I'm looking for a seasonal food that is not there the rest of the year. And that's what these fit in. So they are going to these vernal pools. I looked for ones that had a direct link to a remote location. Like, it's not going to do me good one that's in the middle of the park. I mean, not many people are around at night. Maybe they might come in the middle of the park. I don't know. But, it seems more likely that they would be kind of in an outlying area. So when I found these in a local park, as soon as they got active, I started going every day, but I was not going at night. I would go during the day, trying to find something, trying to see something, trying to bump into something, and I'm always carrying my GoPro. And so I'm just hoping to get something to happen, like you talked about, Doug, of trying to get clear footage with an exceptional lens. And even if it just lasted, several seconds, it might be compelling.
Yep, it would be.
So it was funny. I had chosen this one vernal pool. There's a couple of them right there. And, I would say is the size of maybe, like a McDonald's restaurant, maybe half of that, something like that size.
Yep.
And I was there 8 days in a row. I never saw anything. I never heard anything. But the last night that I was there, when I left, a amateur herpetologist parked in the same place as me and had a Bigfoot sighting. The next day, tracks were pulled out of there. And he was actually on the special edition we did of Finding Bigfoot that was out last year. So in the meantime, I've been going to these vernal pools all the time. It's interesting. I Googled it after we talked the other day. I said, how many vernal pools are in Minnesota? Want to guess?
There's got to be jillions. Go ahead.
250,000.
Yeah.
So where do you go from there? But you have to find ones that are isolated and find ones that, that's in an area where there's a history of Bigfoot activity. Right. It's swampy ground, so it's a great place to find footprints. So you can go during the day and walk around it and look and see if you can find footprints and check in on it every now and then to see if there is, when the salamanders, the wood frogs are also in there. You just see all of nature in these places. It's the first big thing that we think of. Before we used to think of, well, there's mushrooms, there's ramps, are they going to eat that stuff? But the big thing, that we all knew would be when berries got ripe of different types at different seasons of the year. But I really believe that the vernal pools are the biggest thing early in the year and probably one of the most common places for them to be. And so I've been writing about that. I talked about it in the last book, The Appalachian Bigfoot, as a place that people should go and check out. And I really think it's something that we all overlook.
Do you believe that salamanders are non-poisonous to humans for us to consume?
Some are and some are not.
Well, what about the yellow spotted and the blue spotted?
I have no idea.
Yeah, that would be something to look into to see, because I remember something. I did not have time to research it, but I remember when I was a kid, somebody told me, because we would hunt yellow spotted salamanders, that the skin had some poison in it. Just the skin, but I haven't confirmed it.
Similar to toads.
Yeah.
Toads you hear that have that type of thing, but usually whatever nature is going to eat, is a common thing. And when you see these little Snicker bars walking around, they're cool looking, they're all dark black and they just have these great big white fluorescent spots on them.
Yep. And they have a very thick skin. I would imagine these things could, if the skin was poisonous, they could be skinned pretty quick.
Yeah, I don't believe they are, just because of how much. I mean, the coyotes seem docile. You've never, you're in the woods occasionally. You hear an owl, you'll see one or something less occasionally, but they're just everywhere. It's just that chance to see all this wildlife. It's amazing what is coming into these vernal pools. A lot of times when I'm in the woods in the summer and the fall when they're dried up, I still notice places that I know that would be a vernal pool early in the year. And I just make mention, I keep it in my mind as places I want to walk to when I'm out hiking.
Well, the funny thing is, I had no idea that they actually, got together like you're mentioning, for mating. I thought they were very solitary. I had no idea there were these big gatherings of salamanders.
You wonder where they're all at when you see how many of them are moving. And I mean, you can't literally drive down the road without killing many, many of them.
See, I've never seen a salamander migration here in Minnesota, but I haven't really thought about it or looked it up. And so I'm going to definitely investigate that, because certainly they're so easy to catch, because they can only move at 1/10 of a mile an hour.
Yeah, they're really docile.
Yeah, and they're docile.
Pick them up.
No teeth. They don't bite, no teeth. And super interesting. What time do we have, Alex? Okay, we're going to have to fly, Russ. Thank you so much.
Welcome. It's good to see you guys.
Yeah, it's good seeing you. Thanks for popping in.
You're welcome.
Yep. So, we got 5 minutes? We're going to bring Jason on. Yep. And Jason McLean is another amazing guy. I had a chance to talk to Jason again today, and God, he's brilliant. So I think he'll really be informative to a lot of people, and I think they'll get a lot of new information. So definitely stick around here. Yeah, stick around. So anyhow, what else is going on here?
There we go.
I was reading about somebody in the Bureau of Land Management wrecked a number of footprints, dinosaur footprints that were preserved, are really rare, right? And some apparently person with a skid loader or something drove over them and wrecked them. And I'm like, no. It's like the guy who is at a museum and actually, cuts the Mona Lisa. Yeah. It's terrible.
Oh, no.
And that's at the Milk Canyon Dinosaur Track Site in southeastern Utah. And apparently there's 200 fossilized footprint tracks of 10 different dinosaur species. And a number of them got wrecked, yeah.
So can they fix any of that, or is it just done?
No, you can't fix a fossil, once it's
just dust.
I have a feeling it's somebody drove over it, yeah.
Just crushed it.
And then a Mississippi man, I was like looking at big fish stuff, caught 131-pound blue catfish. That's a big catfish.
130 pounds.
131 pounds, yeah, in Mississippi. It's a new world record, I guess, state record and world record. And catfish will just keep growing. They're kind of like
where does it end? I mean, what's the biggest catfish they've ever found?
I don't know. I really don't know. But I would imagine they've been seen way over that.
You
Yeah.
think 200 pounds?
I think there's been people eaten by catfish.
Jeez.
Oh no,
big enough.
I guarantee people have been eaten by catfish.
What a way to go.
There was a time where Dave Regal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where me and Dave got pulled around a lake.
By a catfish?
Oh yeah. It had to be a catfish. I mean, what else could it have been? Pulled us around up and around this whole lake for hours till we had a crowd gathered on the shore, and I finally cut the line.
You just decided enough was enough.
That's enough. We're never going to get this thing in. We would have had news crews out there any minute, because they could see our boat going zoom, zoom, zoom.
Was it slowing at all, or did that thing just?
No. It was pulling us against the wind, and we couldn't budge it off the bottom. And it was just, it was probably a big, huge catfish. It's my guess. Who knows? I don't know. Then I was reading about, this last night about this woman who acted up on an airplane. God, don't ever act up on an airplane. They ended up duct taping her to the chair, which isn't bad enough, being duct taped to a chair. Apparently she was trying to bite people and kick people. So they duct taped her to a chair, but now she's got an $81,000 fine. And that's,
on top of being duct taped to a chair.
Yes, on top of being duct taped to a chair. That's kind of an issue. A little bit of an issue. So Jason coming on is going to talk to us about like things like rope-ins and pterodactyls and all sorts of weird stuff. And
crazy
he actually had a pterodactyl sighting. I'm talking, when he told me today how close it was, I was like, okay, there's not much chance for misidentification. None.
Okay.
I mean, zero.
That'll be exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. It was very, very nuts. And then somebody saw the spot that you had put up about what the show was going to be.
Yeah. And
Todd Neese wrote that he's actually sponsoring a guy in Papua New Guinea to get footage of a roping, which is apparently a pterosaur over there. Looks and matches a pterosaur. And he sent him a thermal camera, game cameras, parabolic microphone, a drone. I'm like, dude, Todd, that's some, expensive sponsorship. So, yeah, that's pretty cool. So if Todd, you're in the audience, that's amazing that you did that. And
absolutely.
You never know, it could be that actually gets the coolest footage ever. Obviously, Todd thinks he's got a chance. All right, let's do it. Let's go to break and then bring Jason McLean on.
Okay, sounds good. All right, and we're back. Let me just introduce Jason McLean. He is a biblical paranormal researcher, and he is an eyewitness to a living pterosaur. He has authored and illustrated several books and can be found hosting the Jason McLean questions everything. He also co-hosts Texas Front Porch every Monday night. So let me introduce Jason McLean. How are you doing?
Oh, so far so good, Alex. Actually, I have an answer for you. Your question about the catfish.
Absolutely.
The largest catfish on record was a Mekong Delta giant catfish, and it was 669 pounds.
Okie doke. Yeah, that animal could easily eat a human, correct?
Absolutely. Well, the goonch, which is a type of catfish native to the, I want to say it's the, I just forgot the name of it. I'm terrible with names, but it's the main river in India and several other. But it's a very, very large catfish. It is believed to have eaten humans. Like, that's a big claim in the area. And what's weird is they have these fangs on them, like catfish with fangs. It's crazy.
Yeah, I've just always had a sense there's no way that there isn't fish, including fish that even like northern pike. Do you know what a northern pike is?
Or absolutely.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There is drawings that go way back to the 15th century of northern pike that were so big they would use them. They would put them in moats and castles. And there's drawings where people have witnessed northern pike attacking horses on land. Wow. Horses going to drink and then coming up and trying to eat the horse. And I can absolutely believe that because, they didn't obviously have a fishing pressure years ago. Right. Fish gets out of its niche. It can just keep growing. I mean, I don't think there's a time clock in a fish that says, okay, you got a 10-year lifespan and you're dead. I just don't think it happens.
Well, and so similarly, we have the alligator gar. It's a type of fish native to Texas. And supposedly, an alligator gar can only get like to a little under 10 feet. But we have so many accounts. Yeah, these are, again, they're called alligator for a reason. Yeah. These are the only fish that really genuinely scare me. But people love to fish them out of the Trinity. But there are so many accounts of people seeing them much larger than 10 feet that officially the Texas Department of Wildlife does consider it a real possibility for giant alligator gar to be a reality. They're not officially documented, but there's so many of them.
And they're definitely the most badass fish out there.
Yes,
I think they're
they're
crazy.
Insane.
Yeah,
and they look like something out of a dinosaur film. It's insane.
I don't know if you're aware, but I actually did a Monster Quest episode, and we featured alligator gar.
I've seen every episode. Of course, I remember that episode.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, I'm a huge fan. It's a big honor.
I just know this, that someday there's going to be some photographic evidence of a person or somebody's going to be videotaping underwater and their buddy's going to get swallowed by a catfish or something. It's going to happen. I mean, grouper, ocean grouper that, they've attacked people and have swallowed people.
Oh, absolutely. Anything, this is my general assumption. We're made out of meat. Anything that eats meat will at some point try and eat a human.
Some of us are old meat, though. Some of us are old meat, Jason.
I believe the term is well-aged.
Well-aged meat, yes.
Yeah. So no, I'm right there with you. Oh, no, please. I'm right there with you. It's, a lot of these larger catfish, they'll eat anything. Speaking of giant catfish, something you can read about in Metroplex Monsters, Dallas Demon, Fort Worth Goatman, and Other Terrors of the Trinity River, available at wherever fine books and trashy rags are sold. That's actually one of the big things I talk about. Aside from the giant,
Can you hold your book up again?
Oh,
Jason,
yeah, sure. Sorry.
I want to see. See, this is like the coolest name. When I first saw your book, Metroplex Monsters, because my brain has been about urban monsters. Urban monsters, because I really do think that they utilize our edges.
Oh, they absolutely do. In fact, as an aside, one of my things, my goals is to find, and I publicly state it because I want people, if they know and can, I want them to replicate it because I don't think having one is going to work. We're going to have dozens of them. But like for Sasquatch, I want to find one of those gas stations that also serves food, right? That's like the restaurants built in. That's on the edge of a town, that's maybe in an area where Sasquatch has been seen, but that the that location is right up against maybe a slightly wooded area that has a creek running through it.
Yeah.
And what I want to do is set up an entirely passive camera, right? Not just a camera trap, an ever streaming passive camera, and just have it trained on that dumpster and just wait, because we know these things will dumpster dive. And supposedly, and I have a little bit of more research to do because I know one of the people who supposedly has actually seen it. There was a video that was destroyed of a Sasquatch going in at one of these casinos.
I'm well aware of that. Yep.
Exactly. So we know that they'll do it. So my thought is, instead of, and not that I even want to get anything against anyone doing it, going out into the woods to look for them, we need to let them come to us. Let have our cameras there. Let where they're coming into our world. That's when we're going to get the best evidence for them. That's just my thought. So yeah, that's my goal. I think it's the edges where we're really going to be the most successful.
Now there was as I remember, a PI that was allowed to see that footage. Is that correct, or is that just the way my memory goes?
Well, that is my understanding. I happen to know the name of someone who is believed to have seen it. I haven't confirmed it personally with him, so I don't want to speak out of turn. But it has been seen.
Well, I talked to the guy. No, but I talked to the guy that saw Jason. I actually talked to them on the phone, but it goes back 22 years.
Yeah, it's been a while.
22 years ago. Yeah, and I ended up talking to him, and I remember him saying that it ducked under a streetlight.
That's pretty tall.
In the parking lot, or a parking lot light.
Yeah, that's quite large.
Yeah.
But I believe it. I think that these things are definitely out there, and I think the best place to catch them is where they intersect with us. I think one of the big assumptions that's often made with any cryptid is we tend to look for where we see the activity is and where the activity is reported, right? And that makes sense, right? Well, we have a report here. Let's go there. But I would just humbly submit the idea that may not be where they are. That's just where they're interacting with us. So we really need to be looking at places where maybe they aren't. If we want to go out into the woods to find them, then we need to be looking at other locations. There's other factors and criteria we should be looking for. Me, though, I think that's not where we're going to find them. I think the best evidence is going to be when they're out in the open, coming into our neck of the woods when they think it's safe. So that's going to be more about, putting, again, camera traps. I think really just entirely passive, streaming 4K cameras in places where we know they're going to be attracted, and just wait. It's going to be a waiting game at that point. Yeah,
that's one of the things that we're doing right now. That I'm doing. We've got a whole bunch of streaming. They're supposedly high def cams, but they use artificial intelligence, and they're running and recording 24 hours a day and night. And to me, that's the way to go.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah,
completely agree. Absolutely.
All right, let's talk about you. In 1992, you had a sighting that everybody's been waiting to hear. Go ahead and maybe give us start at the beginning and tell us what happened.
Well, okay, perhaps not the beginning, but let me stipulate a few things. So I lived in DeSoto, Texas at the time. It's a suburb of Dallas, Texas. And so there's this creek called the 10 Mile Creek. As you can imagine, it runs for 10 miles. Texans are good at a lot of things. Naming things, we are absolutely miserable. Like we have Round Rock, Texas, because that's where a big round rock was in the river. The 10 Mile Creek, Lake Texoma, because it's on the Texas-Oklahoma border. We're terrible at naming things.
Creative.
We're creative. Oh, we have mesquite. We have like Mesquite, Texas. Why? Because there were mesquite trees. We have Cedar Hill, Texas. Why do we have Cedar Hill, Texas? Because it was a hill with a lot of cedar trees. This is just not our thing. So that being said, so DeSoto, Texas is literally right there. It's a right there with Dallas, and to understand a lot of these creeks in North Texas, you have to understand all of North Texas, Southern Oklahoma. We sit on this giant limestone slab. Okay, in most places the soil is actually very, very thin.
I mean, this is one of the biggest watersheds in the world that you're talking about.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, absolutely. And it's one of the reasons why cotton is so popularly grown here, because you don't have to worry about the roots getting going too deep. But because of that, a lot of our creeks go deep into the ground. They'll go like 15, 20 feet deep. And what you have are these, in most places, very sheer limestone walls. And so the 10 Mile Creek is one of these kinds of creeks. And so we had this place, not too far from my house. And one of the walls had collapsed, right? And allowed a lot of drainage into it, but also created like this little, shoreline, just this rocky shoreline. And you can go in, it gave you access to the creek. And we'd go fishing when it was a little bit higher up. You'd catch brim and carp, things like that. And one day, it was, again, 1992, thereabouts. It's getting hot. It's about 10 a.m., almost 11. And my friend that I was fishing with, he's already, we're packing up. He's already heading out, and he's going sort of up the hill. I'm just behind him. And I'm just getting to the tree line when I hear a sound. It's clearly an animal call. And I'm like, I'd never heard anything like it. And it sounded, the only thing I can sort of say it sounded like was like an ugly crow. I mean, that's all I got.
Oh, come on. Ugly crow. You can do better than that, Jason. Ugly crow.
Well, it's the most accurate. Just imagine a crow's, wow, I can't even talk. A crow's caw. There we go. I knew it'd be in there somewhere. But just an uglier version of it. It was just so weird. And so I poked my head out from behind this tree line, right? Because I'm like, what's going on? And I see come around. So the creek sort of just, winds and, snakes around, but I'm in the middle of this straightaway. And so what I see come out from behind this wall over here is what I think is the biggest blue heron I've ever seen in my life. It's the right color. It's doing, it looks like a heron, and it's just, gliding. It's not even flapping its wings. Its neck does the whole S curve thing that herons will do, and I think I see its legs sticking out behind it. So I'm like, man, this is a huge, huge blue heron. And you have to remember, this thing's we're 15, 20 feet down into a creek, so I can really see how big this thing is. And then I'm sort of elevated because I'm up on the sort of the bank a little bit. It gets right in front of my face, and I mean the right wingtip is literally 5 feet, and that's where I sort of realize, oh hey. It's got no feathers. And what I thought had been its legs was actually a long flanged tail. Wow. And one of the other reasons you have to remember, this is still early morning, right? Or not early morning, but it's definitely before noon. So the sun is off to the east. So it was sort of a little bit backlit. So I couldn't see the details until it's right here. Now I don't have the sun in my eyes. And it's like I can see its leathery skin. I can see the tail, and I'm like, it's a pterosaur. And I wasn't scared. I was just surprised. And then I just watched it fly by. And it could, like I said, I'm sort of like at the midway point of this straightaway. So I get a good look at it as it goes by and just turns the corner and disappears out of my life. And I didn't know what to do with it for 20 plus years. Looking back on it, I can see how it shaped my thoughts, but I believe I'd sort of been in this world my whole life. I'm as far as cryptozoology, forbidden archaeology, that kind of thing. So I believe that there were living dinosaurs. I had even heard the stories, the Brownsville sighting in the 70s and the sightings of living pterosaurs down around the Rio Grande Valley. So if you had come to me and said, do you believe in living pterosaurs? I would say yes. But if you were to ask me over those 20 years, did you see a pterosaur? I'd say I couldn't have possibly seen what I saw because I live in Dallas, Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, DeSoto, Texas, but I mean, you say DeSoto, nobody knows what you're talking about. You say Dallas, everyone says, so who shot JR? And I say me. But it's like there's things like that don't live here. They don't live where I live. They don't exist here. if you told me there was some sort of strange unknown insect, I'd be like, yeah, sure, some sort of weird tadpole. I'm right there with you. But a living pterosaur? And yet, as my life has gone on, I began to realize that there were a lot of strange things here. And that's what really led me to write the book. And I've been with the most shocking thing was how many people have seen bizarre things. I didn't have to look very hard. To answer Mike's question, again, between 8 to 10 feet, the walls of where were basically 10 to 15 feet apart in some places, maybe 20 in some places. So I've got a real good perspective on how big it was and compared to the rest of the creek. So again, 8 to 10 feet. And that seems to be kind of average as far as most people who've seen them. I do have one account of them being much smaller, probably a juvenile, only like a 3 or 4 foot wingspan, but all the rest have been around the 8 to 10 feet mark, at least here in North Texas.
How common do you think these sightings are? I'm assuming you've looked into this after having your own experience.
Well, again, in researching the book, Metroplex Monsters, Dallas Demons, Fort Worth Goatmen, and Other Terrors of Trinity. I did not have to. Thank you. I thought you'd appreciate that. You don't have to look very hard. Like, that was honestly the thing that surprised me the most was how hard I didn't have to look. And I'd actually taken a year off to sort of research and do some other things. And when I sort of came out and said, look, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, a lot of people I'd known for 20 years or better came in and said, hey, let me tell you about something that happened to me. Right. So I think a lot more people have seen things, whether it's, again, the Pterosaur here in North Texas. Again, I hated the fact that I had already turned in the book. All I can say is someone known to me called and was like, and he only lives like a mile from my site, from where I had my encounter. He goes, out of curiosity, has anyone talked about seeing a Mothman in the area? No. Why? After a couple of days, I was able to get him to sort of tell me what happened. And he saw essentially the same thing I did, but it literally flew over him. And so it's one of those things where it's people have seen these things. Now, I think one of the ways they're able to stay hidden, at least here in North Texas, is, it is believed that, like the Ropen, these are mostly nocturnal creatures. I do have a sighting at night, right? And again, the Ropen's seen mostly at night. I have some really interesting stories, again, indicating the possibility of them being bioluminescent, coming out of Cedar Hill as well. So I think they're mostly nocturnal. However, when they're seen, traditionally they're seen in the early mornings, but they look so much like a crane when they fly. And they're not, these aren't these giant pteranodons that people talk about seeing where they're, wingspans of 20 feet. These things are only 8 to 10 foot wingspan. They're not so large that they would stand out if you're not paying attention. Right. And everyone I have spoken to, oh, exactly. You have to be pretty close before you start to realize, oh, wait, that's not right. Their coloration isn't all that different. And again, when they fly like a crane. Everyone I spoke with basically said the same thing. I thought it was a crane. I thought it was a pelican. I thought it was an egret. But then I got a closer look. And that's the main thing. It's once you get that closer look, you're like, hold on, that's not right. And I think the problem is these things, right? We drive, in general, we're not looking up. We're not paying attention. Most people aren't watching the natural world that closely. And this is sort of a general, and we can use this to move forward if you'd like, but I call it the green wall.
To your point, they're not even paying attention to the road.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, we're not even paying attention to the road. What do you think they're going to be, paying attention watching that? But the bigger problem is that we as humans, I call this the green wall. We live on concrete islands and we drive on concrete bridges to another concrete island. And all the way around these things, we mow our grass all the way up to a tree line that has been artificially made straight. And in that one spot where we're not mowing, there's enough sunlight and water that we have these very tall bushes and shrubs, and then they all pop up. Well, you can't see past that at all. In fact, around the creek that I'm talking about, because again, we have all the rivers, the flooding every spring. We've created these large, very substantial greenways that have this green wall around them. There's a walking path right on the creek where I had my sighting. There is this there's this walking pathway, and at some points you are maybe 3 feet, 5 feet from a 20-foot drop, but you can't see it because the plant life is so thick. You couldn't, if you ran as hard as you could to jump off that cliff, the foliage would just push you back.
Right.
And so we're driving on highways. We can't see more than 3 feet into that tree line. We can't, all of the creeks. So we're not seeing, it's not just we're not looking, which we aren't. We can't see them. So I saw a couple of questions to Todd Neese. So hey Todd. Yes. Well, I don't know Rex personally. I'm aware of him. We're on the same Facebook thing. So yeah, I'm very aware of Rex Yappy's work.
Yeah.
I just have never met him personally. To Texas Jack's question, yes. What I saw was a Ramphoractoid. The best way to understand is that the Ramphoractoid family of pterosaurs are smaller pterosaurs. They're not the Pteranodons. When most people think of pterosaurs, they think of the Flintstones, right? Or Jurassic Park 3, where you have the big crest and it has the long, sharp bill. Ramphoractoids are smaller. They have long tails that have these diamond shape or other shaped flanges depending on the species. The Ramphorhynchus specifically, which is where the family is named from, is named so because it has a spike at the end of its snout that it sort of serves as a beak, but it's actually a tooth.
Okay.
So they're very common.
I want to interrupt you. Did you get a look at its head? Did you get a good look at its head?
Not that close. Unfortunately, it was still moving kind of quick. And by the time I realized, oh, hey, there's no feathers, again, there's that moment of shock. I wish I had.
So more of the body. You saw more of the body. What color was it?
A Payne's gray, which is for
gray.
paint.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a bluish gray. If you've ever seen a vulturine guinea fowl, it's the color of its head's the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's sort of a Payne's gray.
Very interesting. Super interesting. So do you think that what you experienced could have been maybe a glitch in time, that you were looking back in time, when you saw this versus this as being a living creature that's living currently?
I'm open to a lot of possibilities, to be honest. I just am. Because again, we have to explain this thing being here. I will say this though, I tend to think that there is a living population because of how many people have seen them.
Right.
And they're all being described the same way. They're being described in the same places at the same times.
Yeah.
This is sort of indicative of them being around. And if you go throughout history, there are one of the big things is the wyvern, right? In the heraldic art. It's a type of dragon that was seen in Europe. They're depicted as having 2 legs and 2 wings only, and having a long serpentine body. And they will often be depicted as having, sort of like an animal-like face, but with either a beak or even a spike at the end of their snout. More specifically, and this is where things get really interesting. If you look at the early, not only the heraldic art, because that's always overblown, they're always depicted as having bat wings and things like that. But there was a quote unquote dragon, right? That was killed by a French farmer. It's very, very small. It was taken to a museum in France, and the body was put on display. Now, about 100 years later, there were 3 different artists who had, over a period of like 20 years, went and they went and drew this thing. The last one looks like to be a gaff, like they were trying to recreate this dragon that had been seen. But the reason I find it very, very interesting is that there's 3 features from all 3 drawings, 3 different artists. Again, the tooth at the end of the nose. Some of the drawings show 3 claws in the wings and the long tail. The reason that long tail becomes really interesting is it is at this time. If you look before this, most dragons were not drawn with what we would consider a dragon's tail, right? Where they have that little triangle at the end, the flange tail. They're not depicted as having that. After this time period, though, the flange gets added to the end of a dragon's tail. This is why we actually think of them as having dragon tails. It all comes out of the wyvern, which comes out of this area in this time in heraldic art. So I would argue that what we're seeing is we have three very, very unique features being seen and depicted from an animal that was supposedly had been killed and brought to this museum, and people are seeing it. And so I think that, people say, hey, this is a real dragon. This is what dragons look like. It has a flange on the end of its tail. We need to draw our dragons having this flange. And after that, dragons are always depicted as having a flange tail.
Okay, when you keep talking about the flange tail, can you kind of show us what you mean by a flange tail? Grab a piece of paper. This is the beauty of doing this video. And show us, draw it.
To the mention of Payne's Gray.
And you're an artist too.
Yes. So, I have all these next to my
my goodness.
My thing here. So
I want to see what you mean by a flange tail. Oh, by the way, taking a break here while he draws this, Bill had mentioned getting Scott Tompkins on of the Bigfoot Mapping Project. He's already booked, Bill. We already have him as an upcoming guest.
All right, just a little crude here.
Yeah, well, that's all we expect. Kind of putting you on the spot.
So this is basically what I saw. Let's see if I can do. There we go.
Ooh, there we go.
So that's basically what I saw. But you can see the tail is
it's very unique.
Here. Yeah, it's long. It has this sort of diamond shape. Sometimes they're oval. Sometimes
kind of an arrowhead shaped tail.
Exactly. And they're basically the only species of reptilian that we know of that had that kind of flange on the end of its tail.
That's crazy.
And so the fact that it enters the heraldic art and the idea of this having this idea of the dragon's tail having a sort of this diamond shape at the end of it emerges at the same time that this very small wyvern was killed and brought to this French museum. It just all kind of, it's like, it's too, I don't like coincidence. I'll allow for coincidence, but at a certain point you have to say, okay, this is too much to be just coincidence. And so I would argue that this is what people have seen for centuries. I would argue that the actual creature that was seen in the Jersey Devil, right? The Jersey Devil incident where it's seen in broad daylight, sort of attacking people, and that's where the event that everything sort of comes from. That was a rhamphoractoid pterosaur. The reason we see it as being depicted as having a deer's head and goat's legs, and the reason it looks so weird is because an artist from Philadelphia drew it that way. He wasn't trying to forensically recreate what people were telling him. He just took these things and said, okay, this is what they're seeing. He didn't take it seriously. And if you actually stop to look at the accounts, what they claim to have seen, they're describing something they're totally unfamiliar with. And you have to understand, dinosaurs were not known at this point, not really. So they had no point of reference. And when people see things they don't have a point of reference for, they try to find the nearest equivalent.
Yes.
Right. And so that's exactly what you see with dragons and dragon artwork all throughout history. They look like someone took pieces of other animals and put them together.
Yeah.
But if you were to say, okay, well, they're just describing it, you can actually find, a dinosaur that sort of fits that description.
So name some of the states that have had pterosaur type sightings. What are some of the other states where there's numbers of them?
Oh, yeah. Honestly, if we include the larger ones, and this is as an aside, some people say, well, again, some of them seem to be the size of a Cessna. They look like pteranodons, which does look more like the thing you see in the Flintstones, where they have these 20-foot wingspans. I'm not convinced that these aren't the same species at different stages of development. Okay. I don't know that they aren't, right? I'm not saying that they are two different species. I'm not saying they're not two different species. All I know is we have to realize that there may be what we may be seeing is the same species at different stages of development. But again, including these pteranodons, as near as I can tell, every state has had a sighting. Now, the most abundant seem to be Texas. Both North Texas, Southern Oklahoma seem to see the same thing I saw, right? Sort of these smaller ones. You go down to the Rio Grande, they get much larger. You go out to West Texas, they get larger. And of course, once you hit West Texas, you get Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado. I've got accounts coming out of all of them. I got accounts out of Georgia. I've got accounts out of Michigan, California, all over the place.
How about Minnesota?
Minnesota, same thing. I've got them basically everywhere. I've got them in Canada. I've got them in Alaska. It's insane how they seem to be all over the place.
I've got somebody very close to me, Jason, that had a sighting.
Oh, okay.
It sounded like a really good sighting. I'll have to put you in touch with him because I'm sure you're gonna write your book part 2, I would imagine. No.
I'll address it later. I'm thinking about it.
There's always a part 2. Come on, Jason.
Yeah, there's always a part 2.
There's always a part 2. I'll think about it. Pat, actually, I know Pat. He mentioned this, and we spoke about it on air. I mean, Georgia again. There's a ton of these things. In fact, Charlemagne the God. He's a radio guy. I think out of New York now. He talks about when he was growing up in Georgia, seeing them.
Wow.
I've had, again, people I'd known for years come out and once I sort of said, look, I'm a paranormal researcher working on a book, people came out of the woodworks and said, okay, let me tell you this thing that I saw. I did not have to look hard to write this book. That I am convinced that probably the majority of people in the world have seen something spectacular. And they're afraid to talk about it.
Yeah, it's got to be, if we thought Bigfoot sighting, reporting was maybe 1%, Pterosaur reports got to be 1/10 of 1%.
Oh, even worse. I would even argue it's worse because we did actually, if you go back, there are plenty of accounts from like the turn of the century where people were actively talking about this stuff and then it gets shut off. Really, if you look before World War I, it was not uncommon to see scientists writing about the idea of, these isolated areas and ancient creatures that were still alive, regardless of what they were. They were very open to these things.
Yeah.
But post World War I, and I would argue, again, it happened before then, but that there was an absolute stranglehold put on academia, right? And
what are some of the other prehistoric animals that people have reported that you've run into?
Well, I mean, personally, that's the only one I've run into. But as far as the accounts, we've got accounts of what seem to be small theropods. I mean, they're probably not velociraptors, but most people think of a velociraptor, right? As far as a theropod, it's the dinosaurs that walk on 2 legs, sort of look like birds, but they're long. We have several accounts of those, even here in Texas. In fact, in Metroplex Monsters, Dallas Demons, Fort Worth Goatman, and other terrors of the Trinity River. I've got a story here from the Trinity River of what looks like a mosasaur, which is a type of, again, reptilian. Let's see if you can see that. Dude was fishing on the bank, and then this thing just gets up out of the water and sort of looks at him and then just swims away. Now, he equated to an ichthyosaur as far as the head. But given how far it comes up out of the water, I'm thinking that there was probably like limbs under the water that he couldn't see that was helping him raise up, right? Again, I may be wrong entirely. Hey, Bigfoot and on. The Isle of Umboy is really interesting. I actually have some family out in Papua New Guinea, and I keep getting stories back from them, and I'm like, all right, I know where I got to go at some point. But
so Todd Neese is definitely showing us he's got other passions that we didn't know about.
Yeah,
versus Bigfoot. So I'm surprised, Todd. You're shocking me. He's interesting.
So Jason, you've seen one up close. You study them. Wouldn't you be terrified to go to that place? I mean, I imagine people go missing all the time from these things.
I don't know that I would actually be worried about the pterosaurs. It's all the other things I'd be worried about. Snakes, spiders. I'm terrified of spiders. In fact, every time people talk about, it was a spider the size of a dog, I shut down. I'm like, I don't want to hear it. No. No.
So what do pterosaurs eat? Are they eating humans? Is that a possibility?
Again, we're made out of meat. Okay. To that point, there are several accounts of, so at least the larger ones, going after carrion, including open air funerals. We see stories of them going after the corpses and people fighting off pterosaurs that are attacking the corpse. So it appears they may be scavengers, but I wouldn't be surprised, particularly for the rhamphoractoids, if they eat fish as well. It would seem to fit with their teeth. The fossils we found, a lot of them have very long needle-like teeth that you would expect for something that's flying and skimming and going after fish.
Yeah.
Again, that's where I had my encounter. I have 3 different, including mine. I have 3 different encounters in the 10 Mile Creek.
Okay.
And one of them was seen by 2 different people. Yes, and in Oklahoma, we see them around. Again, most of the accounts I have, they're near a large body of water some way.
Okay, so fish for sure. Yeah. You think they're eating fish?
I think there's a good chance for them to eat fish, and definitely and probably scavenging. Again, most people's like, well, is it this? Is it that? Well, the problem is most animals aren't one thing. Like, there's really no such thing as an herbivore, just less successful predators.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, when something dies in the middle of the woods, deer are like the first thing to show up and start munching down. Rabbits,
people have no idea.
Yeah. You have to keep the little chicks away from cows, because the cows will be like, oh, good, it's a McNugget, and just start eating them. I mean, like I said, there's just really not. Okay, hyenas, they're not really scavengers. They hunt. Most of their prey is usually fresh. In fact, lions are more often to steal from hyenas than vice versa. Everything will scavenge, everything will hunt. The question is, how successful are they? So I think in that zone, but again, what I'm looking for the rhamphoractoids specifically is I'm looking for where I was. I'm looking for limestone creeks where, again, I think they're using those air currents to glide. I don't think that they're really big on flapping if they don't have to. They probably are looking to live in caves, right? Like we see with the Van Meter visitor. Those 2 were found in a cave. I think, again, which would make sense. They're reptiles. They're going to go in. They're going to try and launch themselves off, ride the air current. So I'm looking for things that are elevated. I'm looking for limestone and water, and just trying to find a good location to get a camera on them. I think, unlike Bigfoot, these things aren't smart enough to hide. I think they're just odd enough, and they look different enough, or they look close enough, really, to cranes that we just don't recognize them. We just don't see them for what they are.
Yeah. Are you open to a time glitch, or are you just completely, there's no way?
I'm open to just about everything. I mean, I'm really not going to sit there and say that that's an impossibility, because I'm not a physicist. You tell me. But I am a big believer in Occam's razor, right? Which is, we have people claiming to have seen them for, really, as near as I can tell, it goes all the way back to Egypt, right? We have Herodotus talking about dragons that would that the ibis would eat their eggs. In Isaiah, it talks about, in connection with Egypt, it talks about the fiery flying serpent. Well, that begs some question as to what could this thing be? If these things are, whether it's the rhamphoractoid or not, if they can bioluminesce, I don't see why they wouldn't be calling them a flying fiery serpent. So it seems like these creatures have been around as long as we have. I do have an account of someone claiming to have seen a non-fossilized pterosaur skull in Mexico. But again, you just take it, you say it's an account. I can't do much with that, but people see them pretty regularly. They've been accounted. We have at least multiple accounts of them being dead. Again, the dragon that was killed in France. We have this reported skull in Mexico. Occam's razor says they're just a living population of flying reptiles that have survived to the current day. But
Well,
I'm not going to sit there and say it's impossible that there's some sort of
right.
weird time glitch or something.
Well, I've experienced enough of these small time glitches,
Yeah.
like 5-minute glitches, to where you'll see somebody coming off the elevator, and then you'll see them walking towards the elevator.
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll do you one better. I think that a lot of what we call hauntings are essentially either impressions in time or maybe a weakness in the veils. The ones where they're called non-intelligent hauntings, where they're just, it's the same thing repeating over and over again. I think we're either seeing maybe an impression of that event on time, or maybe there's a weakness there that allows it to repeat and us to perceive it. So I am entirely open to this being a paranormal phenomena. In fact, I tease Tex all the time. I'm like, you realize I'm 30 seconds away on any given day from saying it's all paranormal and walking away, because I honestly don't have that big of an interest in the paranormal. You're like, well, hold on, you're a Christian, but I mean, from a scientific perspective,
right?
Because from a scientific perspective, the paranormal, the metaphysical specifically, we don't have the proper equipment to observe them reliably. And if that's the case, then we can't really get anywhere scientifically per se. I think that the evidence for there being a physical Sasquatch is abundant. And I don't see the types of things we see with Bigfoot, where, the tracks with dermal ridges, fingerprints, the skin oils, things like that. Also, the fact people see them eating, like they just walk up on them and they're like sitting there eating oysters, or they're, just peeling, flesh off a deer and eating and looking at stuff. Like, these are things you'd expect with a normal living population to find.
Or if it's a time glitch,
right?
It could be that you're just kind of going back in time and you're seeing them just going about their, they don't even know they're in our time. They're just going about
exactly.
Yeah.
And again, I'm open to it. It's just right now I would need slightly more evidence for that. But again, I'm open to anything. It's just, I'm sort of an Occam's. I'm the son of a mechanic. Occam's razor. The most obvious answer is probably the correct one. But I'm open to anything. I just want to, show me what you got, and we'll go from there. And again,
I've got a story.
Okay,
I've got a story. No, I've got a story that happened to me.
Oh yeah,
driving up north, 35W, and I'm driving, and Yvette is not paying attention, to anything. She's looking at her phone, and my headlights are, on bright, and they're everything, and I see a giant thing that I think is a moose, and as I get closer of it, I can see it's got a very curved skull or snout. It's very curved, huge antlers, just massive. Far more complex than any moose, but it was the long nose, and it curved upwards. And at the end, I remember the nose came to a pretty sharp point. But this thing was the height of an elephant. So when I get to my destination, I hurry up and I start looking. Is there some kind of giant deer that once existed? I'd never even heard of it. So I look it up, the giant deer, and it was the exact match. And I had no knowledge of it before I looked it up.
Yes. No. Yeah. No, the Pleistocene animals were amazingly large.
Oh my God.
They are, they were monsters. Again, the Glyptodon, one of my favorite Pleistocene animals, is a armadillo the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. And that's not a hyperbole. That's how big they were. So I'm open, like I said, I really am open to a lot of things. And if you could say, hey, here's the test, we can prove this, boom, I'm done.
I can't. No, and I can't. And I can't even say it wasn't a moose that I'd misidentified, but man, I got a good look at it.
Yeah.
And the fact that I had no knowledge of what a giant deer looked like from the Pleistocene era, and then I see one, and I could actually drew it before I even looked it up.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing to me.
Well, I mean, that tells me that you saw it. And actually, Jeff Stewart, Crypto Hulk, he may be known to some people. He mentioned the story, and I hadn't really thought of it this way. But you got into any town, any rural town where there's a lot of hunting, there's that one deer that has been seen for 20, 30 years, 40 years, 50. Everyone's taking a shot at it. Everyone's taking a shot at it. It's the biggest deer you've ever seen. Antlers like you've never seen before. Everyone's taking a shot. Everyone's missed. And everyone's seen it for 20, 30, 40 years. You're like, deer don't live that long. So it becomes the question of, are they really seeing a deer? Or are they seeing something else? Are they seeing the ghost of a deer or some kind of forced spirit, etc.? We don't know. But something that's really become a fascination of mine. I'm trying to get better equipment.
Well, I can tell you this: the head of what I saw was 10 to 12 feet tall. The head,
that's big.
Yeah, it was massive.
No, that's that. Yeah, again, everything from the Pleistocene was unfathomably large. I mean, ridiculously large. I'm kind of glad we live when we live now, because I don't want to have to deal with those things. It's like, oh, hey, look, today you hit an armadillo, it's a speed bump. Back then, you hit an armadillo, you're gonna have to replace your car. It's, the deer back then were a lot more like, everything was bigger. Have you seen the terror birds? They look like
the Teratorns, I guess.
Yeah, well, there are Teratorns, and that's part of the whole, that's one of the big stories. But the terror birds, imagine an ostrich, but larger, and then having a skull like this big, and sort of like the bird equivalent of a T-Rex. I mean, these things were terrifying. And they were just all over the place. Like this is a bird that could go toe to toe with a lion and win.
Right.
So there's all kinds of stuff. Now, again, I'm actually open to a lot of ideas.
I've got numerous people call me and claim they had a sighting of a giant beaver up in Canada.
Yes, I have too.
And they're not saying a giant beaver. They're saying no. This was the size of my truck.
Yes. And they used to get that big. We have fossil evidence for them being that big. And so the way a lot of this stuff, whether it's I tend to think the Lake Champlain monster is actually a Zoolodon instead of like a Plesiosaur or anything like that. I think the thing is, Doug Adams once said, and a lot of people have said something similar, that the world you're born into is the way it's supposed to be forever, right? And you can't, and so whatever you grew up with, whatever the norm was, that's the way it's always been. What we tend to forget, because we just don't look at history, all throughout human history, there were always accounts of trickster spirits. There were always accounts of creatures that were just unknown, right? There were these monsters, sea monsters, land. These all used to be very commonly known and understood, right? It's only been recently where we said, nope, we're the smartest that's ever been, we're the best, we're the most sophisticated that's ever been. These things aren't real, right? And that is just absolutely incorrect. The problem is we have in academia this narrative that became the mainstream. Any evidence that suggested that narrative was wrong gets disappeared. It gets filed under anomalous, or there's something to wipe it away. I just forgot it. Again, I'm terrible with names. Charles Fort, he called it the wipe, right? There would be an account in the newspaper of this fantastic event happening, and then 2 days later there would be a follow-up article finding some obnoxiously simple way to just sweep it under the rug so that no one questioned it anymore. The same thing happens in academia, and we're seeing it. The thing is, it's because of things like this show, this ability to communicate. People are able to communicate and say, hey, hold on, this isn't right. We're all seeing the same thing. We can't all be seeing the same thing if we're all hallucinating or if we're all just getting things wrong. We can't all be getting the same thing wrong over and over and over again. There is something going on.
Yeah, I don't buy into the hallucinating these things, because if you're hallucinating and you have a witness, the chances of both of you seeing the same exact thing are just so, slim. It's just, to me, it's non-existent.
Yeah. So I see Donald Voltz's comment about, essentially before they were dinosaurs, they were dragons, and that's absolutely true. The simple fact of the matter is, I mean, we can find bestiaries, and we can find it's bestiary people. Let's keep it clean. And then there's people who these encyclopedias up until very, very recently that talked about the reality of dragons. And in fact, it was in late 1700s, early 1800s that there was an encyclopedia that said that dragons were still known, but that they were smaller and they had become very, very rare. Yeah. The thing is, again, the idea of climate change, this is not a political statement, but we think of it as a recent thing. It's not. Our climate has made radical alterations for the last few thousand years in ways we don't even really we don't really fully comprehend anymore. The Monder's minimum.
I'm really glad for climate change because my house was under 400 feet of ice.
Yeah, exactly. No, precisely. But it's like in Arizona, where it's we have a civilization, the Anasazi, that disappeared because it went from being a fertile, sort of well-watered area to being just flat out a desert.
Right.
The Monder's minimum. In fact, I think the Monder's minimum, particularly for Europe, plays a huge role in this. But what we tend to forget is it used to be quite warm, like in Europe. I mean, much warmer than it is now. Every time a glacier recedes, the only thing we find is evidence of human habitation. And where people's pickaxes and tools from the Middle Ages had just been left there because they couldn't take it. Just the glacier showed up, right?
Yeah.
The Maunder minimum is actually why the Stradivarius is very unique to its sound, because of how short the growth time or the growth period for the trees. Essentially, in the Middle Ages, it was much warmer in Europe, and then it got real cold real fast. It used to be so cold in Britain that the Thames River would freeze over so completely that they would have frost fairs. Elephants would be brought onto the Thames River and in circuses for people to be like, ooh, wow, this is an amazing creature. Imagine how cold it has to be for the Thames River, a free-flowing river, to completely freeze so solidly that you could have an entire fair, hundreds of, if not thousands of people walking on it, and elephants and stands, people cooking food over it, and everything's fine.
Yeah. Well, I personally believe in climate change. I just believe it's been changing forever.
Yeah. That's my whole point. Oh no,
Yeah.
completely. That's completely right. Our climate is always in flux, and these fluctuations have led to the extinction of other animals.
Yeah.
I think the problem is because, again, modern science got its start in Europe, whether we like it or not. I know it's not fashionable to say, but it did. And so the thing is, they started with what they knew. Well, if all of the exotic animals, the dragons and the ogres, if they'd all died out because of this Monder's minimum, or they had moved on, then they're not around anymore, right? And so the thing is, I think a lot of what we're dealing with is the fact that we had a mass extinction event only 1,000 years ago, right? And so as we've moved on, we're just now getting to the areas where they've survived. In fact, my big fear is I'm not going to find a living pterosaur in the North Texas region because we had that polar vortex a year ago, where I can't stress enough how strange this is. Some people who live up north will be like, well, okay, sub-zero temperatures aren't that bad. What people don't understand is it doesn't get that cold in Texas for that long. Yeah. Like it was frozen as far south. I mean, whole ponds were frozen solid in San Antonio. Yeah. Now, that's insane. I cannot tell you how insane that 1 week was, where everything was it was frozen solid. So my fear is that event has actually wiped out the pterosaurs in my area. I'm hoping that they're migratory, though. My hope was that maybe that what's happening here in North Texas is that we are a breeding ground, that the larger pterosaurs come here, they breed, they lay eggs, and then they leave like sea turtles. And so my hope is, if that's the case, then we have a chance for seeing juvenile pterosaurs, which I find lucky because juveniles tend to die early on, which means there's a good chance of finding the remains of say a pterosaur that's a couple days old, couple weeks old, maybe a couple months old, and then we can recover that and actually observe it. We can test it, but we'll have to see what happens.
It's crazy. We were talking about the Trinity River, and I was reading, and apparently that's a watershed that's 1,100 miles, or
it's massive.
1,100 kilometers, and it's the biggest watershed in the U.S.
Yes,
the longest. That's crazy. And people always think of Texas as dry.
Well, so here's the thing, because it is. In fact, with all the lakes in the area, you wouldn't think it was all that dry in North Texas. But the thing is, the Trinity River is what allows anything to live here, just at all, because it's we have these massive watersheds, and the Trinity is a navigable river. Like that's why life is here, right? That's why everyone's along these creeks and these rivers, is because that's where the water is. There's no water anywhere else. Like there is no natural lake in North Texas.
Okay.
People often claim the Caddo River or the Caddo Lake is the only really natural lake in Texas, and even that's a bit of an exaggeration. What we've done is we've dammed up a lot of these tributaries to the Trinity River or parts of the Trinity River to create these lakes that we have today. Because Texans love fishing. We moved to a place where there's no fish and no water, and we made fish in water. That's what we do. But yeah, it is remarkably dry, except for where the Trinity River is, and that's why we can even exist.
Well, let's switch gears and talk about the other creatures that ended up in your book.
Sure.
Maybe you can explain a little bit more of what why you named it, what you did, and get into some of these other creatures, like even Goatman.
Goatman's actually a great sort of midway through this whole thought. So very quickly, everyone's familiar with the Lake Worth monster event in the 60s, right? Jim Mars. Well, he's the one who names most people, and I included, believe it to be a Bigfoot. In fact, I even because the Cedar Hill Historical Society actually recorded several accounts in Cedar Hill and allows us to actually continue the story of the Lake Worth monster. All the sort of, you can track it all as it migrates from Fort Worth down around Cedar Hill over to the 10 Mile Creek, over out to the Trinity, because there's this interesting connection of waterways. And so, but the thing is, the name Goatman, that's what sticks. And so what happens is the name Goatman becomes synonymous with not just everything, not just certain locations where you can see where they're following the waterways. It also becomes sort of the go-to name for all of the paranormal events that happen in the area. And as that happens, like there's a Goatman all over Texas, like all over North Texas. We've all got Goatman's Bridge here, and Goatman's Bridge that, and the Goatman at White Rock Lake. There we go. And again, because Texans, we're terrible at naming things, White Rock Lake is named because it's on limestone, so it's all white. It's just a bunch of white rock. But the thing is, the one there, we have the story of Sandy Grace, who, broad daylight, she's running, a 7-foot tall satyr walks out of the wood line, smiling, has this evil grin on his face, walks toward her, and then disappears in a flash of light. Hold on. I got a picture of Sandy Grace right here. All right, this is what I drew. I mean, that's the event right there. This thing walks right up to her, smiles, and disappears. And this is a personal win for me. It's one of those things where it's like, ha! I actually found a second account. This is a person I've known for years. I mean, decades. He was older than me, but we went to the same church. We knew each other, and he was telling me the story. It happens before Sandy Grace. Him and his and a couple of his buddies. They have a date. He's in college, early 90s. They're out there. Again, they came out of dinner. It's about midnight. They're walking there. They're laughing. They're joking. And I mean, White Rock Lake is a beautiful place. It really is. And then one of the girls sort of runs off ahead, turns around, and is making fun of them for being slow. And when she does, she starts to scream bloody murder. At first, they're trying to figure out what's wrong until they all turn around. And that's when they see a 7-foot-tall man with goat legs and horns just standing there under the lamp. It terrified them so much that the guys took off without the girls.
Gee.
And he was like, we weren't going back for them. They had to keep up. And it's like, for this man to confess that, again, this is Texas. We protect the women folk around here. For him to be like, no, we were gone. We wanted nothing to do with that. We took off. So what we have are people actually seeing goat men in base. It's not really downtown Dallas, but it's not far from downtown Dallas. And you're like, well, what do you do with that? Well, I started looking around. I found several other stories of watersheds and water. You know, sometimes they're man-made, sometimes they're natural, but they connect to White Rock Lake.
Okay.
And the thing is, when you get a little bit away from White Rock, the horns disappear. The goat features disappear. He becomes less jacked and more slender. And one story is the family had been shopping at Walmart. It was late. They're both teachers. They didn't get a chance to do anything until like very, very late. Kids asleep in the back. It's like midnight. They pull into their driveway. The wife looks over and sees essentially the creature I just described. It's tall, slender. Some people would call it a rake, but she couldn't see any features on the face, but the head seemed elongated, almost alien. But it's just standing there looking at them. And she is freaking out. They finally get the car inside. She's freaking out. They close the door. She locks everything. She's done. Her husband thinks she's lost her mind. The next day they go to church. As they're passing by the spot where she saw the creature, the car just jolts like he hit something. He's now freaking out because he's worried he's hit somebody's dog or maybe some kid running from him, because it was a sizable, thump. Like the husband's like, I was terrified. I thought I'd killed somebody's kid. And he's running around the car looking for the thing that he hit. And there was nothing there.
Jeez.
So whatever this thing was had an effect on the car. I mean, physically, but it gets worse because a few days later, her son comes into her room and says, the black man is staring at me. And of course, they're basically downtown Dallas. She's saying, okay, one of her neighbors is probably drunk or high and is in the backyard, because his room goes right up. You can actually walk out into the back room into the backyard from his room. There's a big, large glass sliding door. So they go there and there's nothing there. And so he goes out, he looks around, nothing's there. Next couple of days, every night he's come back seeing the same thing. And finally they're like, can you draw what you're seeing? The thing he draws, the thing that he's waking up to at night and seeing through his door, is the same thing his mother saw the week before. And it is and she goes, she said it terrified me because she never told him about what she saw. She didn't want to scare the kid. And yet this thing is standing in their backyard watching their son while he sleeps.
Creepy. Very, very creepy.
Spooky, yeah.
Yeah, it would sound, again, it's one of those things that would sound like a ghost story, except for the fact that I know these people personally. And the husband, the wife, the kid, they're like, this is what happened. And it terrifies them. Goatman's Bridge, which is the old Alton Bridge in Denton. I have the story of that. I go into the folklore about it. But just down the road from that bridge, I have an account of a man driving home. It's like 2 a.m. And he's in his truck. He's just driving. And this thing, about 5 feet tall, walks out in front of his car. He describes it as very similar, right? Thin, except it's 5 feet tall, slender, sort of biggish head, but the legs are backwards. They're digitrade. And it looks at him. It scampers across the road, turns, looks back. It has golden, like the golden eye shine, like a cat, and then just disappears into the woods.
Wow.
I have a similar sighting in Cedar Hill. I mean, it's like I don't know what to do with these. I mean, beyond the fact that to say that they happened. I mean, these are creatures that seem fair. They show up a ton of in other stories like rakes, wendigos. We seem to have this. The Dover demon seem to fall into this pattern of gangly, long, thin, oddly shaped bipeds. I have a story, so I can tell this story. I'll tell it quickly. Gentleman known personally to me, his house, he was suffering from sleep paralysis, and he was seeing these shadow people coming into his house and tormenting him for years. One night, and again, the reason he was talking to me about this was that his daughter had seen one of these creatures in their house. And so that's what prompted him to come to me, because he's like, I need to stop whatever this is, because these things are, and my daughter is seeing them. Like, she was awake, and this is the worst part. She was awake, and she said she saw a dark figure, this sort of spindly, tall thing, like 7 feet tall, but real lanky, go into his room. And it scared the ever-loving bejesus out of her. So that's why he was talking to me. Well, what I hadn't told him was that I had talked to 2 other people in our neighborhood. Or, okay, it's our neighborhood. I guess I've already let that one out. One was in the field behind his house. The other, as far as where they saw this thing, the other one was literally out front of his house. So 2 different people seeing the same creature. One's in front of the house, one's behind the house. I hadn't told him about this, but they all described the creature the same way. Very thin, very spindly, bipedal, long tail, oddly shaped head, sort of elongated, big circular eyes, and then the kind of teeth and jaws that you'd find on an angler fish. So these very long, very thin teeth. And the thing is, I've talked to the researchers, and people have told me, they're like, I've got an account of something that looks just like this. Essentially looks like the xenomorph from the Alien franchise, just with eyes, smaller head, and teeth. These long needle teeth.
That's kind of crazy. So what do we do as researchers when we get these stories that they don't fit into any category? What do we do?
That's a great question. What I'm doing is I think we have to take the account. We just, we need one thing I would, in fact, Jason McLean questions, everything is actually on after this show. We're going to talk about the Thunderbirds. And one of the things I'm going to talk about is that we need to stop. We need to stop looking at what people are calling these things, right? Particularly the paranormal things, or the metaphysical things, because the problem is we're getting tied up in the fine details, and we think we know what we're talking about, and we don't. Like, can you tell me the difference between a Mothman and a Garuda, or a Mothman and a gargoyle? Do we know that they're the same thing? Do we know they're not the same thing?
Yeah.
So what we kind of need to do is find what are the commonalities. Like, I call them the reverse-legged entities. These creatures that seem to be humanoid, bipedal, but their legs go a different direction. There's a bunch of different forms that they seem to be taking, but the overall shape seems to be the same. Flying humanoids. They're humanoids that fly. Pretty obvious. But it's we kind of just have to take the account. We need to probably stop stripping we need to strip the names away from it, because that's getting in the way, right? If I say Lechusa to you, you think, okay, that's a very specific thing. If I say harpy, you're thinking, okay, that's a different thing altogether. If I say Lilith, that's also another thing. But if I say what we're looking at are paranormal entities that are the shape of large owls or large night creatures associated with witches, human, usually female faces. Well, I've just described all 3 phenomena, all 3 of these well-documented historical creatures, and they all have connections to witches. Sometimes the stories, the witches become them. Sometimes the witches control them. Either way, we have a lot of the same themes, and they're all overlapping. I say goat man, I say satyr, I say fawn, I say leshy, I say shahadim. You think these are all different things. But if I say the hairy man that is in the woods, a trickster that draws you into the woods to die, I've described all the same phenomena. Sometimes they're worshipped, sometimes they're not. But they're all connected to the same type of phenomena. I think what we're dealing with is, I think we're seeing these things, we're giving them new names, and every culture has given them their own name.
Yeah.
But a lot of these metaphysical creatures have been around forever. They've always been here.
What's your whole take on the missing people? You know, the missing 411 phenomena that David is so brilliantly educated us all on. What's your thoughts?
So I think it's actually like a lot of these things are multiple phenomena, right? That we're putting into one thing. I think some of these cases are very clearly are just so outside of the norm that we know we're not dealing with human perpetrators here. I think the UFO phenomena is involved in some of this. There are people who talk about, again, we have portals, people finding themselves in locations that they don't recognize and then backing up and they're back to where they were, right? I'm okay with, again, just about any kind of phenomena, portals or whatever. But I think we're dealing with multiple things. I think some of these cases are actually cases of human possession, and that the human goes off to do something. There's a long connection of demonic possession with suicide or harming the human. So I do think that's also a big role in a lot of these things. One of the creepiest things I was looking into the whole idea of missing people, not just the 411, but just how many people go missing every year. And I talked to a friend of mine who was a former homicide detective and very, very high up in the Dallas Police Department. I threw a question out there. I said, hey, out of curiosity, how many, particularly the really violent criminals, the ones where it's like maybe this person doesn't even have a record of violence, or they just seem like the normal person, and they end up stabbing somebody 137 times. Yeah. Right. Or they're eating kittens, and you're like, what happened there? I said, out of curiosity, how often when you spoke to those people, did they, the ones that didn't have the history of mental illness, and they said, I don't know what I was doing, but I couldn't stop myself, or I felt like I was outside of my body watching it happen. He said nearly every person that, again, didn't have a history of that kind of thing, that committed some of these, sometimes they're heinous crimes, sometimes they're not heinous crimes, or they're hurting themselves, because they all to the man said, I don't know what possessed me to do it. I didn't want to do it. I was outside of my body. I was watching it happen. I think that the problem is we've for so long rejected even the idea of the supernatural, that we've tried to throw everything out. And then we don't realize that a lot of these things have been going on under our nose the entire time. It's harming people, disappearing people. And again, some of the 411 stuff I think is absolutely UFO related. I wouldn't be surprised if there were portals, but I also think a large percentage of it, maybe more than we want to realize, may be due to possession. So the person is leaving, just not of their own volition, and that person's killing themselves, but completely beyond their control.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many cases where people will suddenly drop their matches, drop their cell phone, all their survival gear, and then they never find them. Like, why would you do that?
Oh, exactly. Where the behaviors don't make sense. It's we see, and again, we see this kind of thing even in scripture. Some people call him the epileptic, but that's a medical thing. It's very clear that he was possessed. And when the demon would come upon him, he would throw him into fire. It would throw him into water to drown him. We have plenty of accounts of stuff like this, even in the modern day. I think it's when we start seeing, again, whenever there's this radical shift in behavior and they're not doing things that make sense. It's like we have these campers, and this is someone who's been in the woods for years. They know how to do things. And like you said, they drop all of their materials in one spot and they just disappear. It's like, that's telling me there's something else involved. Again, some of these are clearly UFOs. Some of them may be Sasquatch related. Some are portals. I don't know. But I do think a large percentage of them are these demonic possessions where they're just like, boom, all my survival stuff's gone. I'm going to kill this meat bag out in the field. And that's what the demon's thinking. And just leads them out somewhere to die. We tend to forget how easy it is to disappear in the woods, right? It's sort of the whole idea of why don't we find Bigfoot bodies? Well, they don't even have to bury them. All the Bigfoot have to do is take their fallen comrade a few hundred yards off into the woods where we don't go, and that body's gone in a week. Like, they don't even have to bury him. They could just practice some form of excarnation. All they have to do is get the body somewhere we don't go. In a week, that thing is gone. We would never know it was there.
Yeah, exactly. So what you brought up the lechuza. What is that? Explain
it. In my book, I won't do that again. That's a lechuza.
Ooh. That's
it is literally.
If I saw that, Jason, it'd be done. I wouldn't go anywhere. I'd just stay in my house, lock my doors. I'd never leave. Yeah,
well, she tried not to. So she was living with her aunt, who was a Kirandara. It's sort of like Santeria, but different. She's basically an occultic practitioner. It's sort of, again, it's a combination. It's a syncretic religion of Catholicism, some old Indian beliefs, some voodoo beliefs, things like that. So it's like Santeria. It's a syncretic religion. But she was the Kurandara for Oak Cliff, and she was, and the girl was walking home one night with her friends about midnight, and they heard the trees around them. Like, they noticed everything got really quiet and really dark, right? And you're like, okay, well, it's at night. What you have to understand is Oak Cliff is basically just downtown Dallas, right? It's in fact, for most people who don't know, Oak Cliff is where they found I'm terrible with names. I should never do this. The guy Oswald, where in fact where this happened, it was not too far from where Oswald was caught at the Texas Theater. So it's not that far from downtown. It does not get dark. Period in the story. You don't see stars there. The sky at darkest is purple, and it's always loud. Okay, because they're going past basically a halfway house, so there's always music. There's always game bangers blasting their stuff even at midnight. This is not a dark place. This is not a quiet place. But they noticed it got dark, and it got quiet, and they start to freak out, and then they start hearing like this tree off to the back of them. It sounded like a horse hit this thing. Like, just like someone had thrown a horse into the tree. So they're like, okay, that's weird. And they start walking. And then all of a sudden they hear it leap from this tree to the other tree in the same crashing sound. So they freak out. After a while, they freak out. They take off. And then her friend's like, you know what? Your aunt's the witch. I'm going this way. It's probably after you. She turns around and says, I better not end up dead. So she's running, and this thing is it's moving from tree to tree, keeping pace with her. And then at one point, when she's just in front of the house, it flies over her, and she's got her switchblade on her, and she's already got it pulled, and she's banging on the windows like, you got to come out here and help me, because she's not supposed to be out. Her aunt comes out, and as soon as she opens, she's just mad that she's getting woken up in the middle of the night with her banging on the glass and everything. And so she's getting ready to tear her a new one when her eyes get as big as dinner plates, and she's like, don't turn around. And she's swearing and praying in Spanish, and she had those an apron, but it's full of pockets, and she's throwing charms and amulets and magic things at this thing. She's swearing and of course, what does the girl do? She turns around and looks at what's chasing her. And that's what she describes as this lechuza. It's an owl the size of a human being, basically, with a woman's face, but it's an owl. And this thing is actually it's bending the oak tree in her front yard down. I found the oak tree. I found the house. It's there. It's still there. This thing was having a physical effect on the world around it. She gets inside. Aunt locks the door and tells her to go upstairs and get in the shower. She gets in the shower. Her aunt is breaking eggs over her, and she's throwing all kinds of spices on her, and she's praying over her in Spanish, and she's doing these incantations in Spanish. She takes all the clothes and and she was very adamant that her brand new Doc Martens were in this pile that she took out. And for any 90s child, anyone who grew up in the 90s, they know how important those Doc Martens were to us. I loved my Doc Martens.
Yes.
And so she went and burned them. And so obviously she is pissed because she's like, those are my brand new Doc Martens. For a week, she could hear this thing following after her. Because even in the bathroom, while they're doing all the incantations and stuff, she could hear this tapping on the glass. She goes to her room. She can hear this on the glass all night. Stops about 3 a.m. But she was even, she ditched school one day because that's what she was doing at the time, and went to the West End where there used to be a movie. Actually, there may still be a movie theater there, but wasn't a whole lot of people there. But she could hear it rustling, like in the shadows around her. So this is clearly not this isn't a natural creature. It is a paranormal, metaphysical thing. And yet, it had a physical effect on the world around her. Her friend heard it and saw the effect that it was having in these trees. That's why she took off. Her aunt saw it. So the thing is, to the Hispanic community, it's a lechuza. But like I said, if you go back to Greece, it's a harpy, right? They're recorded in the Iliad and the Odyssey. You go to Mesopotamia, it's Lilith. It's in Papua New Guinea. I forget the name of it. They don't describe it as being owl shaped, but more bat shaped. But it's the idea: bird of the night, creature of the night, bat. In connection with a woman's face, like this thing. This is a phenomenon that's gone on in most cultures around the world. And this is why we still sing lullabies. A lullaby was a song that was designed to protect you from Lilith. It actually is a Hebrew word, is the origin for the word lullaby.
Wow.
These creatures have been seen for thousands of years, and we're just recording them again in our culture. But the thing is, we think we're special. We're not. We're just the newest in the line.
I would not want to see something that creepy. That's absolutely nuts. Just nuts.
Yeah.
I think I would check myself into the nearest mental health facility.
Mm-hmm.
Just crazy. So, are there anything else that's just creeps you out, Jason? I mean, what gets to you?
Yeah,
what gets you?
Giant spiders.
Giant spiders.
Actually, normal sized spiders too. I mean, they don't have to be giant. But
are there reports of giant spiders that you know of?
There better not be. Not in Texas. I mean, like Africa, yeah. Like Africa, yeah. We've got plenty of stories of them, which is why I ain't ever going there. But yeah, not in Texas. And if they are, I'm buying a flamethrower. But I get honestly. So here, okay, this is probably the thing that would be the funniest. The thing that really profoundly creeps me out more than any of these other things that we've talked about, because I have a place to put them, right? I can categorize them. And honestly, the paranormal stuff doesn't bother me at all, because I'm not all that interested, because we can't observe it scientifically, and as a Christian, I do my best to keep myself protected from it. So I'm not really that worried about it. Mermaids freak me out, because I don't know what to do about them.
I have no fear of mermaids. None. No fear.
I'm just saying, Ariel's flipping around. I'm just not happy about it. I just don't want to know. Now I've got plenty of accounts of them. I've got reliable accounts of actual mermaids, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with it. Like some watery tart out there luring men to their deaths. I don't want to know. So I like the land. I like the land. That's all I'm saying.
So do you think that most mythological creatures have some basis in fact based off of your research and the things you've experienced?
Yes, absolutely. Now, what I will say though, truth is always stranger than fiction, but it's always also less dramatic. And one of the things actually really stunned me while working on the book was the connection between is really how lore develops. Like we actually get a chance to sort of see how we go from the Fort Worth goat man, which is basically just I think probably just a Bigfoot with mange, and then how it develops into this larger Goatman mythology that has clearly paranormal overtones to it, and sort of exploring how that develops. And it really makes me look at when people say, well, this is the story of the creature in this area. It has radically changed my mind on how I look at lore. And one of the things that's it's pushed me to do is realize that there's a difference between what people say is seen and what people actually see, right? And we need to, and definitely as researchers, we need to do a better job of saying, okay, the lore exists and that's fine, but we need to understand that lore is corrupted. It's folklore, and the problem is unknown phenomena tend to all get crammed together in one thing. Again, with Bigfoot, I'm convinced that there's a physical, natural Bigfoot. They eat, poop, procreate, whole 9 yards, right? Bipedal hominid of some kind. But I think that a lot of what is, I would argue, very clearly paranormal phenomena is getting tied up into it. People are saying, I saw this thing, and then they use the word Bigfoot. Now it's a Bigfoot sighting. And it's like, I'm sorry. If I wake up in the middle of the night, 2 a.m., I see a tall, dark figure standing over me with red glowing eyes. Okay. Well, if I'm in a sleeping bag in the woods, it's Bigfoot. If I'm in my room in my house outside of Dallas, Texas, it's a demon or a shadow person, or on and on and on. I think the problem is in all these cases, we have a lot of phenomena being crammed into a name and into this box. And then we're trying to figure out why we can't find anything. Imagine, if you will, that some unknown deer and an unknown wolf all sort of lived in the same area, and you called them by the same name. These accounts wouldn't make sense to you. You wouldn't be able to really track down or find what you're looking for, because one person over here is talking about a deer, the other person is talking about a wolf. If they were called the same name, the accounts wouldn't make sense to you. And I think that's what we're seeing in this larger field that we're doing. Is we've got a lot of phenomena, and because of the name it's called, we're putting them all together. What we need to do is really look at the phenomena itself, what's seen, what's recorded, and then we need to start breaking it up that way. I'm of the opinion we should drop the names like Mothman, even Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and then figure out a new nomenclature so we can really start identifying things from what's observed and not what we think, and not what we're told we should be seeing.
Yeah. It's true. We're just about out of time. Where can people get a hold of you? Where can they report their bizarre encounter?
Papers@yahoo.com. You can actually, so that's my email address. Again, Texas Front Porch on YouTube. That's where you'll see me twice a week. Actually, I can announce very, very shortly there will be a third show that you can catch me on in the coming months. But that's all on Texas Front Porch, or you can go to my website, sirupapers.com, SIRU papers.com, like it is in the little doobly-doo right here. You can go to the website, that's got a link for everything. So you can email me. You can go to Texas Front Porch. We have emails that you can send your account to. We'd love to hear the accounts and try and figure out what's going on. Again, weirder the better, right? I hate to say this because I know a lot of people are real big into Bigfoot. I don't really care all that much about Bigfoot per se. Yeah. Like, as I'm a generalist, I want to. I like the shape of the world kind of a thing. Right. I want to know where everything fits, whether it's Bigfoot or the Loch Ness monster, living pterosaurs, forbidden archaeology, UFOs. I like that because I think if we take larger steps back, we can see where these things are fitting, and we can come to real answers.
So, last thing, why should somebody buy your book? What makes it different?
It's a love letter to the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex.
Okay.
Beyond the story, the accounts, which again are really interesting, beyond the observations of how lore develops and all that, it's a love letter to the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. You're going to hear stories you've never heard before about how these things came into existence. Small stories. Like, why is Texas Instruments where it is? Why did it become important? You're going to hear stories about Hell's Half Acre. You're going to hear stories of how, people made this place a livable place. It's my home. I love it. And everyone should come and see it in the spring when when the bluebonnets and Indian paintbrushes are in bloom.
Cool. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Yep, we got to have you back.
No, thank
Talk
you.
soon. All right.
It's an honor.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.